The Intergalactic Council sat in the Grand Chamber, an air of arrogance palpable among its members. Aliens of various forms, sizes, and species exchanged glances of amusement, speaking in hushed tones about the latest addition to their list of potential conquests, humans. From the Council's perspective, this species was no different from others they had easily subjugated. Primitive. Short-sighted. Fragile. They think they can resist, one council member scoffed, his many eyes narrowing in disbelief. Their fleet is a fraction of our size. Another nodded in agreement. It's just a matter of time. They'll follow the protocol like everyone else, offer a token resistance, and then surrender when they realize the futility of their fight. In the center of the chamber, a massive hologram displayed the skirmishes that had begun in the outer sectors. Human ships were indeed outnumbered, smaller, and seemingly less advanced. The Council had crushed countless civilizations like this before, and every time, the conquered species had accepted the inevitable. Surrender protocols were well established, and most species followed them without much resistance. Once the Council's fleets moved in, they always gave the same ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. The Council leader, a being with shimmering scales and an elongated form, looked down at the data on humanity's early encounters. Their ships are barely holding together. They're refusing to communicate, though. Odd. Normally, by now, we'd have intercepted their surrender codes. Perhaps it's a delay in their system. The room buzzed with laughter at the suggestion. It was inconceivable to the Council that any species would choose to fight when the odds were so clearly against them. Surrender was not just protocol, it was common sense. After all, the Council had hundreds of years of dominance to back its authority. However, in the cold expanse of space, human forces were holding their own. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they weren't retreating. Every skirmish ended the same way: the humans would fight until the last possible moment, pushing their ships and technology far beyond what the Council believed possible. One by one, small human victories started to accumulate, though they seemed insignificant compared to the scale of the Council's fleet. A skirmish in Sector 14. A sudden ambush near the Nebulan cluster. Each time, humans defied expectations. They're losing ships faster than they can replace them, a tactical officer muttered to a colleague. They'll break soon. Just give them time. Yet, weeks passed, and the humans still did not break. They didn't communicate with the Council's ambassadors. No attempts at diplomacy. No request for negotiations. Silence. The Council remained smug, though a sense of unease began to creep in among the more cautious members. The human stubbornness was strange, bordering on reckless. Why continue to fight when surrender was the obvious, logical choice? Maybe they don't understand, suggested one member of the Council, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Their communication systems might be. Nonsense, interrupted another, his voice booming. They know exactly what they're doing. This is a delay tactic, nothing more. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. The Council had seen this play out hundreds of times before, resistance followed by inevitable submission. But this time, something was different. Humans weren't resisting out of hope for survival. They weren't stalling for time. They were simply fighting. Relentlessly. The Council leader watched the unfolding events with growing impatience. Send more ships. Crush them quickly. I want their homeworld in ashes within the next cycle. The order was clear. No more games. No more assumptions. The full force of the Intergalactic Council's fleet would descend upon humanity, and this nuisance would be dealt with swiftly. The Council had no doubt in its superiority. The humans would surrender. They had to. No species had ever refused the protocol. Not in living memory. What species, after all, would willingly choose total annihilation over survival? The Council dismissed the thought of any other possibility. Humanity was a small threat, one that would be dealt with quickly. The battle raged on, human ships locked in combat with the overwhelming fleet of the Intergalactic Council. Each time the Council's forces attempted to hail the humans, they were met with silence. It wasn't that the humans couldn't respond, they simply chose not to. Human commanders moved with precision and clarity, their forces coordinated with an almost eerie efficiency. The Council's fleet was massive, far superior in size and firepower, but humanity didn't seem to care. They fought like they had nothing to lose. The Council's arrogance began to crack. They'd expected resistance, but nothing like this. "Why won't they stand down?" one Council officer growled, watching in frustration as another human ship evaded their attacks and countered with devastating force. The ship's systems were old, outdated compared to the sleek designs of the Council's vessels, yet somehow, they were holding their own. On Earth, humanity had always fought against impossible odds. From ancient wars to world-ending crises, their history was steeped in struggle. And that history now guided them through the stars. No one was coming to save them, and they knew it. The very concept of surrender was foreign to their instincts, forged in the fires of wars and survival back home. The Council members couldn't understand it. They sat in their command centers, baffled at humanity's refusal to comply. "We've given them every opportunity. They know they can't win. What are they waiting for?" Inside the command ships, human leaders remained focused. They had no intention of explaining their decisions to the Council. There would be no negotiations, no truce, no retreat. As far as humanity was concerned, this was war, and war meant total commitment. Their past had taught them one brutal truth: you fight until the end. Victory wasn't just about strength, it was about endurance, persistence, and an unyielding will to survive. Humanity's commanders gave the order to engage, not with words, but through their actions. No broadcasts. No pleas. The message was clear: we will not surrender. Back on the Council's homeworlds, there were murmurs of confusion. Reports of human ships holding positions despite heavy losses started to pile up. It was as if the more they were attacked, the more determined they became. Council leaders began to question what was happening. Why wouldn't the humans follow the rules? Every species had a breaking point. Every species eventually saw the logic in preserving life over destruction. But humans weren't like other species. Their history wasn't shaped by submission but by resistance. They didn't see surrender as an option. There was no honor in giving up. Surrender was defeat, and defeat was unacceptable. In one of the human command ships, a veteran officer reflected on the wars of Earth. He thought of the countless times humanity had faced extinction, whether by war, famine, or plague. Each time, they had fought back, not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to accept defeat. It wasn't about strategy, it was about survival. And this time was no different. Alien leaders convened, growing frustrated. "It's insanity," one snarled. "They're throwing their lives away. Don't they care about their species' future?" But the truth was, humans cared too much about their future to give in. They weren't fighting for glory or power. They were fighting because they had no other choice. The Council had miscalculated. This wasn't a species that would fall in line with their protocols. Humans were unpredictable, driven by something far more powerful than fear, their stubborn refusal to be conquered. As the Council's forces redoubled their efforts, sending wave after wave of ships, they expected to break the humans at last. Yet, for every human ship destroyed, another emerged, more determined than the last. It wasn't logical. It didn't make sense. But the humans didn't care about logic. They were fighting with the one weapon the Council couldn't comprehend, a will that refused to break. The Council began to realize they were dealing with something they had never encountered before. This wasn't a species that fought for survival alone. They fought for something deeper, something the Council had long forgotten, the belief that no matter how strong the enemy, you never surrender. The Council was growing desperate. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, another wave of human ingenuity appeared on the battlefield. This time, it wasn't just stubbornness keeping the humans in the fight. They had begun to deploy advanced technology the Council hadn't anticipated. It started with small things: adaptive shielding, stealth tactics, weapons that seemed to increase in power with each engagement. The Council's analysts couldn't explain it. These were supposed to be a primitive species, yet their tactics and equipment evolved faster than any species the Council had ever encountered. The Council's fleets, though vast and powerful, were built on centuries of tradition and protocols. Each ship adhered to established designs, each strategy honed by years of conquest. But the humans were different. They adapted. They innovated. What they lacked in resources, they made up for in creativity and unpredictability. On one battlefield, a human strike force unleashed a devastating AI-driven drone swarm, shredding through an entire Council formation. The drones moved like liquid, impossibly fast, targeting weak points with surgical precision. The Council's officers were stunned. There had been no warning, no sign the humans had this kind of technology. Every encounter revealed something new, something the Council had failed to account for. In the command center of the Council's flagship, a high-ranking alien commander stared at the tactical readouts. "How are they doing this?" he demanded, his voice filled with frustration. "These are not the same humans we fought weeks ago." His subordinates were at a loss. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving in combat, exploiting every weakness, every flaw in the Council's overwhelming force. They had no regard for the rules of engagement, no hesitation to use strategies that the Council deemed reckless. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks, cyber warfare that crippled even the most advanced Council systems, the humans played a different game altogether. The human fleet didn't just react to the Council's attacks, it anticipated them. Each time the Council tried a new strategy, the humans countered with something unpredictable. It was as if they knew what was coming before it happened, staying one step ahead of the Council's every move. And it wasn't just technology. Human commanders had an uncanny ability to read the battlefield, adapting faster than any alien mind could comprehend. The Council's commanders, who had once dismissed the humans as a minor threat, were now beginning to panic. Reports flooded in from every corner of the war. Humans were winning battles they had no right to win, outmaneuvering fleets many times their size, using tactics that defied conventional logic. A sense of fear began to creep into the hearts of the Council's finest. They had always assumed superiority meant victory, but now, facing humanity, they weren't so sure. Back on Earth, the human leaders knew what was happening. They had expected the Council to underestimate them. After all, it wasn't the first time humanity had faced an enemy that believed themselves to be invincible. But humans had spent centuries fighting for survival against odds that seemed impossible. Their history was full of enemies who thought they were unbeatable, until they weren't. A human commander gave the order for the next strike, his eyes cold and focused. He knew what the Council didn't, that this war wasn't just about ships and weapons. It was about the human spirit, the refusal to back down even in the face of certain death. The Council could send all the ships they wanted, deploy every weapon in their arsenal, but they couldn't understand what drove humanity. They couldn't grasp the concept of fighting not just to survive, but to win at any cost. For the Council, this war was about maintaining order, about asserting their dominance over yet another species. For humanity, it was about proving they wouldn't be controlled, that they would not surrender, no matter the cost. Every battle, every victory sent a clear message: humanity was not like the others. The Council's fleet commander, watching the destruction of yet another battle group, finally understood. "They don't care about the odds," he muttered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "They're fighting to the last breath." But by the time the Council realized what they were up against, it was already too late. The Council had gathered the largest fleet ever assembled, determined to crush humanity once and for all. This time, there would be no subtlety, no attempts at negotiation. They were done playing games. Every last ship was mobilized, every resource directed toward ending the human resistance in one final, overwhelming strike. Their confidence was unshaken, they believed in numbers, in sheer force. Victory was inevitable, or so they thought. As the fleet surged toward the human lines, the scale of the coming battle was unimaginable. Council ships stretched as far as the eye could see, blotting out the stars with their massive formations. On the surface, it seemed like nothing could withstand this force. Yet, as they approached, the humans didn't retreat. They didn't even falter. Instead, they moved with precision, calmly preparing for the onslaught. The battle began with a ferocity that shook the fabric of space. The Council unleashed a barrage of firepower designed to obliterate anything in its path. Planets were vaporized, asteroid fields turned to dust. But somehow, impossibly, the human fleet held the line. Every time the Council thought they had gained the upper hand, human ships would slip through their ranks, hitting weak spots in their massive formation. It was like fighting a shadow. No matter how many times they struck, the humans would reappear, stronger and more determined than before. Council commanders screamed orders, desperately trying to regain control of the chaos. But the humans were everywhere, weaving between the behemoth Council ships with ruthless precision. The Council had the numbers, but the humans had the advantage where it mattered most: strategy, speed, and an unrelenting drive to win. And then, in the middle of the battle, the Council leaders finally realized what had been staring them in the face all along. They had expected humans to break, to surrender like every species before them. But the humans weren't interested in surrender. They had no protocols for retreat. There was no plan to give in, no matter how hopeless the situation might have seemed. The Council's arrogance had blinded them. They had never faced an enemy like this, one that would fight to the bitter end, no matter the cost. Panic began to set in as they watched their fleets, massive, unstoppable forces, get torn apart by the human forces that refused to die. The Council's ships, designed for large, predictable battles, were useless against the unpredictable tactics of their human adversaries. In the chaos, Council leaders began to question everything they knew. How had it come to this? How had a species they had deemed insignificant turned the tide of a battle so decisively? They had underestimated the humans' capacity for resilience, for adaptation, and for survival. One by one, the Council ships started to fall. It was a scene that none of the alien commanders could comprehend: mighty vessels, armed with the best technology the galaxy had ever seen, reduced to wreckage by a force they had mocked only weeks ago. Human ships darted in and out of their formations, picking them apart with surgical precision, as if the humans had studied their every weakness. It wasn't long before the Council fleet's morale broke. What had begun as a show of force to crush an enemy had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Alien commanders, once so sure of their invincibility, now issued frantic orders for retreat. But it was too late. The humans had them cornered, their ships trapped in a relentless assault with no hope of escape. As the last Council ship fell, the realization hit them with full force. The humans weren't like the others. They didn't care about the odds. They didn't care about protocol. They didn't surrender, and they never would. For the first time in living memory, the Council had been defeated, not by superior numbers, but by sheer willpower and a refusal to accept anything less than victory. The Council had assumed that humanity would follow the same path as every other species they had conquered. But humanity had never been one to follow. They had forged their own path, driven by a spirit that refused to bend, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Council had finally learned the hard way: when you fight humans, you don't just fight their technology or their ships, you fight their indomitable will. In the aftermath of the battle, the vast wreckage of the Council's once mighty fleet drifted silently through space. What had started as a war of domination had turned into an unimaginable defeat, one that shook the very foundations of the Council's understanding of warfare. For the first time, they had encountered an enemy that refused to follow the rules, an enemy that saw surrender not as a necessary end, but as a concept that simply didn't exist. Back in the Council chambers, the atmosphere was tense. The arrogance that had once filled the room had evaporated, replaced by disbelief and fear. The reports coming in from the battlefield were undeniable: humanity had not just resisted, they had won, and they had done so without even considering the possibility of surrender. The Council members, who had once laughed at the idea of humans being a threat, now sat in silence, unable to process the full scale of their defeat. "How is it possible?" one Council member finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. How could they refuse to surrender even when facing total annihilation? There was no answer. For all their intelligence, their superior technology, and centuries of experience, the Council could not comprehend the human mindset. They had always operated under the belief that every species valued survival above all else, that when faced with overwhelming force, any rational being would choose to surrender rather than face extinction. But humans weren't rational in the way the Council understood. To humans, survival wasn't just about continuing to exist, it was about living on their own terms, free from the control of others. And for that, they were willing to fight to the very last. In a secluded room, a Council strategist reviewed the battle data once more, trying to find where everything had gone wrong. The humans had fought with a level of ferocity that no one had predicted. They had exploited every weakness, adapted to every tactic, and shown a level of ingenuity that defied all expectations. But more than that, they had fought with a determination that bordered on madness, a refusal to accept defeat even when it seemed inevitable. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The Council had learned an uncomfortable truth: humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They weren't driven by fear, nor did they fight for glory. They fought because they simply would not submit. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Council had ever faced. Back on Earth, humanity didn't celebrate their victory as the Council might have expected. There were no grand parades, no triumphant speeches. For humans, this was just another battle in a long history of fights for survival. They had faced enemies before who believed they were invincible, who believed they could bend humanity to their will. And each time, humanity had proven them wrong. This war with the Council was no different. It wasn't about proving strength or dominance. It was about the simple fact that, as a species, humans had always fought for their freedom, and they always would. The Council, now facing the reality of their defeat, was left to reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare, strategy, and dominance. They had always believed in the power of numbers, in the inevitability of submission. But they hadn't accounted for the one thing that made humans different: their refusal to surrender, no matter the cost. As the remnants of the Council's fleet limped back to their homeworlds, the lesson was clear. Humanity had shown them that survival was not just about submitting when the odds were stacked against you. Sometimes, survival meant fighting with everything you had, even when the logical choice was to surrender. And in that defiance, humans had found their victory. For the Council, this war would forever change their perception of what it meant to conquer. They had faced an enemy that didn't care about protocol or tradition, an enemy that fought with an unyielding spirit that could not be broken. And while they had once laughed at the humans, they now understood that the true strength of humanity lay not in their ships or their weapons, but in their will to fight until the very end. The Council knew that they would never forget this lesson, that from this point forward, humanity would be seen not as a primitive species, but as a force to be reckoned with. They had earned their place in the galaxy not through power, but through the simple refusal to ever give up. The Council had underestimated them once, but they would not make that mistake again.